your doctor isn't going to tell you this. Not because they don't know, but because there's no appointment for it, no prescription, and no follow-up. There are things you do every single day, things that feel completely harmless, some of them even healthy, that are systematically breaking down the inside of your body right now. Not dramatically, not fast, but quietly. Your liver is accumulating fat you can't see. Your arteries are stiffening in ways a standard blood pressure cuff won't detect. Your brain is producing less of a key neurotransmitter every single morning because of one specific habit you almost certainly have before breakfast. We're going to go through 11 of these. Not the vague stuff you've heard before, like drinking more water or sleeping more, but the actual biological mechanisms, what each habit does to specific organs, specific tissues, and specific systems in your body, and why the damage happens so silently. Some of these are going to surprise you. At least 2 of them I'm willing to bet you're doing right now thinking they're fine. Let's start with the first one, eating within 30 minutes of waking up. This first one sounds backwards, and that's the point. Most people think eating breakfast immediately when you wake up is the responsible, healthy choice. You've been told this since childhood. Don't skip breakfast, it's the most important meal of the day. Here's what's actually happening in your body when you do that. When you wake up, your cortisol is naturally at its peak, called the cortisol awakening response. This surge peaks roughly 30 to 45 minutes after your eyes open. And cortisol's job in this context isn't stress. It's mobilizing energy. Your body is already dumping glucose into your bloodstream from stored glycogen, preparing you for the demands of the day. That's by design. When you immediately eat on top of that, especially carbohydrates, you're now adding a second glucose spike on top of the one your body already initiated. Your pancreas has to produce a rush of insulin to handle both. Research published in Nutrients shows that meal timing relative to the cortisol peak significantly affects postprandial glucose response, meaning the exact same breakfast hits your blood sugar differently depending on when cortisol peaks. Do this daily for years, and your insulin sensitivity gradually degrades. Not overnight, not dramatically, but quietly. The kind of quiet that shows up as pre-diabetes 15 years later and surprises everyone. The science suggests waiting 90 minutes to 2 hours after waking before your first meal, letting that cortisol peak do its job without interference. Your liver glucose regulation, your insulin response, and your energy stability through the morning all improve when you let the biology run its sequence first. Mouth breathing, especially at night. Your nose is not just for smelling things. It's a biological air processing system. It filters particles, warms incoming air to approximately body temperature before it reaches your lungs, adds humidity, and critically, it produces nitric oxide, a vasodilatory molecule that your lungs use to improve oxygen transfer into the blood. Your mouth does none of that. When you breathe through your mouth, especially chronically and during sleep, you're bypassing the entire filtration and conditioning system your respiratory tract depends on. Cold, dry, unfiltered air hits your airways directly and the nitric oxide is gone, which means your blood oxygen saturation is lower than it should be. This means your tissues, your organs, and your brain are all slightly oxygen deprived on a chronic basis. Research from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden demonstrated that nasal breathing increases blood nitric oxide concentrations by up to 15-fold compared to mouth breathing. That's not a small difference. The downstream effects compound fast. Chronic mouth breathing is associated with elevated cortisol, disrupted sleep architecture, meaning you're spending less time in the deep restorative stages, higher blood pressure, and in children, measurable changes in craniofacial bone development. In adults, it accelerates tooth decay and gum recession by reducing salivary flow. The fix is simple. Nasal breathing during the day is largely a practice issue. You can retrain the habit. At night, many people use mouth tape, a small strip over the lips during sleep. It sounds extreme, but the research on it for sleep quality is surprisingly strong. sitting for more than 6 hours a day. This isn't because you don't exercise. This is the counterintuitive part. A 2017 study published in Annals of Internal Medicine tracked over 7,000 people and found that total sitting time predicted mortality independently of exercise habits. This means people who worked out regularly but sat for long, unbroken stretches still had significantly elevated cardiovascular risk. Exercise didn't cancel it out. The mechanism runs through your vascular endothelium, the inner lining of your blood vessels. When you sit for extended periods, blood flow through your lower body slows dramatically. Your femoral artery, the large vessel running through your thigh, sees a reduction in shear stress, which is the mechanical force blood flow creates against vessel walls. Shear stress is what keeps your endothelium healthy. It triggers the release of nitric oxide, which keeps vessels dilated, pliable, and resistant to plaque formation. When shear stress drops because you've been sitting still for 2 hours, endothelial function declines measurably within that window. The vessels in your legs become more rigid. The same process that causes sitting to raise clot risk in airline passengers is a milder version of what's happening at your desk. The intervention isn't long workouts, it's interruption. Research shows that breaking sitting every 30 minutes, even with 2 minutes of light walking, largely reverses the endothelial impairment. Your vascular system responds to movement signals in real time. Give it signals. Doom scrolling before bed. There are 2 separate problems happening when you do this. Most people only know about one. Blue light from screens suppresses melatonin production by blocking the retinal cells that signal nighttime to your suprachiasmatic nucleus, the brain's master clock. This delays sleep onset. But the one almost nobody talks about is the content itself, which may actually be worse. Your amygdala, the threat detection center of your brain, does not distinguish between threats that are physically present and threats that are emotionally activating on a screen. News, conflict, outrage, and anxiety-inducing content are all processed by your amygdala as real proximate threats. Cortisol rises, norepinephrine rises, and your nervous system shifts towards sympathetic activation, fight or flight, right before the moment when it should be downshifting into parasympathetic rest. A study from the University of California found that late-night social media use is specifically associated with elevated next-day cortisol and degraded slow-wave sleep. This is the restorative deep sleep stage where your brain consolidates memories and your body runs cellular repair protocols, including autophagy. The window between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. is when growth hormone secretion peaks, driving tissue repair, fat metabolism, and immune function. Disrupted sleep disrupts that entire cascade. The 30-minute cutoff before sleep isn't just about melatonin. It's about allowing your amygdala to come offline. Your nervous system needs a runway. Blue light is one issue. Threat-based content is another. You need to cut both. Eating ultra-processed food more than 3 times per week. Ultra-processed food doesn't just mean junk food. The NOVA classification system used by researchers worldwide defines ultra-processed food as any product that contains ingredients a home cook wouldn't use: emulsifiers, artificial flavors, modified starches, high fructose corn syrup, hydrogenated oils, and carrageenan. This includes foods marketed as healthy, like protein bars, flavored yogurts, most breakfast cereals, and many gluten-free products. A 2023 meta-analysis in the BMJ analyzing over 10 million people found that higher ultra-processed food consumption was associated with a 50% increased risk of cardiovascular mortality, a 48 to 53% higher risk of anxiety and depression, and a 12% higher risk of type 2 diabetes. For every 10% increase in daily ultra-processed food intake, all-cause mortality increased by approximately 3%. But the mechanism that concerns researchers most right now is gut microbiome disruption. Your gut contains approximately 38 trillion microbial cells that produce neurotransmitters. Roughly 90% of your body's serotonin is made in the gut, regulate immune function, and metabolize compounds into active molecules your body depends on. Emulsifiers like polysorbate 80 and carboxymethylcellulose have been shown to disrupt the mucus layer of the intestinal lining. That mucus layer is your gut's first defense. When it degrades, bacterial populations start making contact with the intestinal wall, leading to systemic low-grade inflammation. This inflammation fingerprints everything: cardiovascular disease, insulin resistance, and neurodegenerative risk. The threshold where measurable microbiome disruption begins appearing is 3 or more servings per week, eating your largest meal late at night. Your liver has a circadian clock. Most organs do, but your liver's clock is particularly sensitive to food timing. During daylight hours, your liver is optimized for metabolic processing, breaking down fats, clearing toxins, and managing blood glucose. At night, specifically after around 8 p.m. for most people, it shifts modes and begins prioritizing fat storage and glycogen replenishment over active metabolism. When you eat a large meal late at night, especially one high in refined carbohydrates and fat, you're delivering a massive metabolic load to a liver that has already shifted into storage mode. The result is that a disproportionate amount of that meal gets converted to fat and stored in the liver itself. This is how non-alcoholic fatty liver disease begins in people who don't drink excessively. It's not just alcohol, it's late eating chronically. Research from the Salk Institute demonstrated that mice fed high-fat diets within an 8 to 10-hour active window had almost no metabolic dysfunction, while genetically identical mice eating the same calories across a 16-hour window developed fatty liver disease, elevated cholesterol, and prediabetes. The food was identical, the timing was the variable. In human studies, late eating independently predicts visceral fat accumulation, even when total caloric intake is controlled for. The timing of calorie delivery matters to your liver in ways that BMI calculations don't capture. Fatty liver has no symptoms in its early stages. It's not painful, and you don't feel it. You discover it at a scan, usually after years of damage have already accumulated. Try to close your eating window at least 3 hours before sleep. Let your liver downshift before the lights go out. Chronic, low-level dehydration. Most people aren't dramatically dehydrated. They're chronically, mildly dehydrated. This distinction matters because mild dehydration produces no obvious symptoms at the level most people experience it. There is no severe thirst or headache, just slightly concentrated blood, slightly more viscous plasma, and a slightly elevated heart rate at rest because your heart has to pump harder to move thicker blood through your vessels. Research published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology found that adults who maintained higher daily fluid intake had significantly lower rates of heart failure and cardiovascular disease over a 25-year follow-up period. Those with serum sodium levels above 142 millimoles per liter, a marker of chronic underhydration, had a 64% higher risk of developing heart failure. Your kidneys are filtering your entire blood volume approximately 40 times per day. When you're even mildly dehydrated, your blood becomes more concentrated, meaning your kidneys have to work harder, using more energy and putting more mechanical stress on the nephrons, the filtering units inside each kidney. You have about 1 million nephrons per kidney, and they don't regenerate. Once they're damaged, they're gone. Cognitive function is particularly sensitive to hydration status. Studies from King's College London show that losing just 1 to 2% of body weight in water well before thirst kicks in impairs attention, working memory, and psychomotor speed measurably. The brain is 73% water. Even minor dehydration means neurons firing in a slightly more concentrated ionic environment. The problem is that thirst is a late signal. By the time you feel thirsty, you're already 1 to 2% dehydrated. The fix isn't complicated, but it requires intentionality. Start with water before coffee. Keep fluid visible throughout your day. Dark urine is a reliable real-world signal your kidneys are too concentrated. Drinking coffee within 90 minutes of waking. This is not about whether caffeine is bad for you. It's about when you use it. Adenosine is a byproduct of neural activity. Every time your neurons fire, adenosine accumulates. After enough accumulation, it binds to adenosine receptors and you feel sleepy. Sleep clears adenosine. Caffeine works by blocking adenosine receptors, not by clearing adenosine. When you drink coffee immediately after waking, adenosine is already at its lowest point of the day because it has just been cleared during sleep. Cortisol is at its natural morning peak, doing its job of mobilizing your energy. You're adding caffeine to a system that's already in its most alert state. What actually happens is that caffeine occupies the receptors while adenosine continues building in the background. When the caffeine wears off, typically 4 to 6 hours later, you have a disproportionate amount of accumulated adenosine flooding back to now vacant receptors all at once. That's the afternoon crash. That's not a caffeine shortage. That's an adenosine rebound. Research suggests waiting 90 to 120 minutes after waking to consume caffeine, after the cortisol peak has begun to naturally decline. The result is that caffeine occupies receptors when adenosine is building rather than minimal, providing a more sustained, stable effect. The afternoon crash is significantly reduced and total alertness across the day improves. This is also why people who start drinking coffee later in the day often find their sleep quality degrades. Caffeine's half-life is 5 to 7 hours, meaning half the caffeine from a 2 p.m. coffee is still in your system at 9 p.m., still blocking adenosine receptors and suppressing the sleepiness signal you need to fall into proper sleep architecture. Chronic social isolation or loneliness. Loneliness is not just a feeling. It's a biological state with measurable physical consequences. Research from Brigham Young University, analyzing 148 studies covering over 300,000 participants, found that people with adequate social connection had a 50% greater likelihood of survival compared to those with poor social connection. The effect size is comparable to quitting smoking and exceeds the impact of obesity, physical inactivity, and heavy drinking. The mechanism is inflammation. Researchers at UCLA discovered that loneliness produces a specific genomic signature. It upregulates the expression of pro-inflammatory genes and downregulates antiviral gene expression. Your white blood cells literally read loneliness as a signal to prepare for bacterial threats like wounds rather than viral ones. Lonely people mount worse responses to viral infections. That's not a metaphor. That's genomics. The downstream effects cascade through every system. Elevated IL-6, a key inflammatory cytokine, rises chronically in socially isolated individuals. IL-6 at chronically elevated levels is one of the strongest predictors of cardiovascular disease, depression, cognitive decline, and cancer progression in the medical literature. Chronic loneliness is also associated with elevated cortisol, impaired sleep architecture, specifically reduced REM sleep, and accelerated biological aging as measured by telomere length. The brain experiences social rejection through the same neural circuitry that processes physical pain, the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula. Social pain and physical pain are not different categories in your nervous system. They share infrastructure. The threshold research points to isn't deep intimacy. It's what's called functional social connection, meaningful interaction with people who know you at least several times per week. Avoiding sunlight. The fear of skin cancer produced a generation of people who avoid sun exposure almost entirely, and in doing so created an epidemic of vitamin D deficiency that's quietly linked to almost every major chronic disease in the literature. Vitamin D is not a vitamin in the conventional sense. It's a steroid hormone precursor. Your skin synthesizes it when UVB radiation from sunlight hits cholesterol in skin cells, triggering a conversion cascade. That cascade requires actual sun, not filtered through glass and not through SPF 50. It requires skin exposure to direct sunlight. The data on vitamin D deficiency is genuinely alarming. Approximately 42% of American adults are deficient, with rates above 60% in Black and Hispanic Americans due to higher melanin concentrations requiring longer sun exposure for equivalent synthesis. Vitamin D receptors are present in virtually every tissue in the human body: brain, heart, immune cells, pancreas, and bones. Deficiency is independently associated with elevated all-cause mortality, increased cancer risk, including colon, breast, and prostate, immune dysfunction, depression, insulin resistance, hypertension, and autoimmune conditions. A meta-analysis published in the BMJ, analyzing 73 trials, found that vitamin D supplementation significantly reduced cancer mortality and cardiovascular mortality. But sunlight does more than drive vitamin D synthesis. Morning sunlight exposure, specifically within an hour of waking, sets your circadian clock via retinal melanopsin cells. This produces cascading effects on cortisol timing, melatonin secretion at night, sleep quality, and mood. The photons that hit your retina in the morning are not the same biological event as photons at noon. The body uses the specific spectral quality and angle of morning light as a timing signal. 10 to 20 minutes of midday sun on skin several days per week is sufficient for most fair-skinned people to maintain adequate vitamin D levels. The key word is midday. UVB wavelengths are only present in meaningful quantities when the sun is above approximately 45 degrees elevation. Morning sun doesn't drive vitamin D synthesis, even though it drives circadian signaling. Both matter. Both require you to actually go outside, never practicing deliberate stress recovery. It is not stress itself that is the problem, but the absence of deliberate recovery from it. Your autonomic nervous system has two modes: sympathetic, the accelerator, and parasympathetic, the brake. Modern life runs almost entirely in sympathetic mode. Email notifications, traffic, deadlines, financial pressure, and ambient uncertainty. None of it is life-threatening in the acute sense, but your nervous system cannot distinguish between a deadline and a predator. Threat signaling produces the same cascade. The problem is not stress activation. That's normal and necessary. The problem is insufficient recovery. Your nervous system needs to complete the parasympathetic cycle to fully deactivate the threat response, not just suppress it. When it doesn't, cortisol doesn't fully clear, and inflammation persists. Your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis stays sensitized, meaning it overreacts to smaller triggers over time. The research tool that makes this visible is heart rate variability, or HRV. HRV measures the variation in time between heartbeats. Counterintuitively, higher variability indicates a healthier, more adaptable nervous system. Low HRV means your heart is beating with robotic regularity, a sign of sympathetic dominance, poor recovery, and elevated cardiovascular risk. A 2021 meta-analysis in Frontiers in Physiology found that low HRV predicted cardiovascular events, depression, anxiety, all-cause mortality, and impaired immune function across hundreds of studies. It's one of the most predictive biomarkers of systemic health that most people have never heard of. What drives HRV up? Slow extended exhale breathing, specifically a physiological sigh. A double inhale through the nose, followed by a long exhale through the mouth. Rapidly shifts vagal tone and increases HRV within minutes. This isn't meditation as a lifestyle. It's a biological protocol. 2 to 5 minutes of extended exhale breathing is enough to measurably shift your nervous system state. Cold exposure also raises HRV over time, as does consistent sleep and Zone 2 aerobic training. Steady-state cardio at a conversational pace for 45-plus minutes. All of these rebuild parasympathetic capacity. The people who never deliberately practice recovery, who go from work to screen to sleep to work, are living in sympathetic dominance. Their cortisol never fully resets. Their inflammatory markers trend up year over year. Their organs are aging faster than their birth certificate suggests. Here's the thing that ties all 11 of these together. None of them feel dangerous. That's the whole point. Eating breakfast immediately, sitting at your desk, scrolling at night, drinking coffee when you wake up, these don't feel like threats. They feel like your life. The biological damage from these habits doesn't announce itself. Your liver doesn't send you a signal when it starts accumulating fat. Your endothelium doesn't register stiffness as pain. Your microbiome doesn't alert you when it starts shifting toward inflammation. The HRV decline, the telomere shortening, the chronic IL-6 elevation. None of it has a symptom until it does. And by then, it's not one habit's damage. It's years of compounded, interconnected, systemic erosion. You don't have to fix all 11 today. Pick the 2 or 3 that landed for you, the ones where you felt the recognition, the quiet, I do that moment. Start there. Change one timing, change one behavior. Give your biology the signal it's been waiting for. Your body is not passive, it's responsive. It's running continuous repair operations, continuous recalibration, and continuous adaptation, but only to the inputs you give it. Give it better inputs. If you want to go deeper on any of these mechanisms, the cortisol rhythm, the gut-brain axis, the metabolic effects of circadian disruption, those are the next videos. Each one is a system. Each system is connected. The science is clear. What you do daily either compounds toward health or compounds toward disease, quietly in one direction or the other, every single day. If this exploration of the hidden habits damaging your body has changed the way you look at your daily routine, please subscribe to our channel and like this video. We are dedicated to uncovering the biological truths and the history that often remains buried. Start planting the seeds for a healthier future today. The next treasury of vital insights will be opened soon.